We were in the office this morning doing a card pull from this morning's hunt, and on a stand that looks pretty promising that was actually set up just last week. Had to move a spot due to some pressure that came in on a neighboring farm that was different from years past, and so we had to do some adjustment. But what we're going to talk about this morning, guys, is something I've had since we did the video. I have this comment or this question a lot. But since I did the video on it not too long ago about tying access into, that T-style stand placement, and why a T-style access and T-style stand placement is so important about keeping the wind, if you're accessing into the side, why that is so important. And so I'm going to touch on that a little bit. I had over 20, I looked last night, I had over 20 direct messages on that. And made some really good contacts and potential clients, and over those conversations I think that really generated with some folks. So we're going to talk about that today, and I'm in the office now getting some of these this card work done, and then I'm going to put this on the board for you when I get up to the house at the cabin there to really draw it out and then tie this to it. Why do I feel so? It's always important to do that side access and that to create that T-style stand placement. But why? The question that kept coming up is, why do I feel so strongly about it this time of the year? And my answer is, I feel more strongly about it this time of the year than I do any time of the year. The next, from here through the rut, but especially right now. And over the next couple of weeks is that the cruising phases start, and the bucks are on their feet. I pulled some of the cards here, like we were saying, and even dating back to a cold snap that we had on October 9th here in Michigan. We had a buck run through the camera, and just you can tell that there's a lot of activity. They're getting in that mindset, if you will. Now, obviously, that was way before the pre-rut. But that cold snap got them thinking, and as bucks do, they were trying to just to see if how receptive the does would possibly be. Obviously, it didn't get very far that early in the year. And the example that we're going to use is accessing from the east. The easiest way to explain it here is north to the top, like always, south to the bottom. We're accessing from the east side of the farm, and we are walking west into that predominant west or northwest wind that a lot of us get. You're looking for that north-south travel, and by coming in from the east side of the farm and finding that north-south travel, what you create is you do not get caught in the wind currents that will haunt you during a cruising pattern. And you've all heard this, and I've heard it I'm going to say 100,000 times, but I'm sure it's more than that. But you always hear the sayings. One of the ones that come to my mind is, we had to zip the back of the blind because it was a north wind. We had the north wind blowing at our back, which is horrible. But the south wind was coming in one window, or those. When I hear those comments, I always wonder, like, where exactly are you in this T-shaped stand placement that I always try to resort all of my stand placements, all my designs, and try to educate all my clients on, is because if you're zipping windows to get away from the wind, you're not in that T-shape. Because if you're in that T-shaped access or T-shaped stand placement, you're like on an east, if you're accessing from the east side of your farm or east side of a public ground setting, and you've got that north-south travel. So like we said, the perfect place that I love to hang stands, and I try to hang all of them, but depending on contour, maybe you got to tweak it so it's not exactly east and it's not exactly west, but maybe it's southeast. Whatever the case is you want to take advantage of that north-south travel as much as you can without interrupting that line of travel. And the reason is if that north-south travel happens in the evening, or if it happens in the morning, you can hunt. A lot of times you can get away with hunting both of those wind directions, or both of them sits. And the reason is because, like, if you're accessing from the east, anything easterly, meaning a northeast, an east, or a southeast wind, you can get away with it because it's blowing back the way that you came. It's blowing in the windows of the blind, and it's blowing back the direction that you came. If you come right straight in east, or if you come up a ridge, a line to get to it, or whatever the case is, that is always blowing back and hopefully back into non-deer areas. What I fear is this time of the year is why I don't ever set up an inline stand, is because, like I had said before in the previous videos, is if you have a buck, let's say, the stand placement that I see the most of is a stand placement that you're looking to the north, and that that's great. You're keeping the wind in your favor, but if you're accessing that, if a stand placement is looking to the north, it needs to be on the southernmost portion of your farm with southern access. And the reason I say that is because then you're looking north, and your line of travel then should be east to west, right to left, east to west. So if you put yourself on the east side of the farm, then what that creates, your north-south travel is right to left as well, and that's north and south. So the reason that, like I said, the reason that I don't like it this time of the year is the reason that I promote it the most this time of the year, and I always try to tell the clients to make sure that you're doing this way this time of the year, is because if you are in line and the wind is blowing in your face, and let's say you're catching a buck transitioning off from ag or out of the oaks, going back to bed, no matter what time of the year, but this time of the year, because we're here at the end of October, and everything is good, and it's not a buck that you want to shoot, or it's one of your hit listers, and it's just outside of range, or he comes running through too quick with a doe. Just because he is faced the other way from you does not mean that he's not going to wind you. And what I see is a stand placement, access from the east. Stand placement, you're looking to the north, you're catching the deer transitioning, all deer transitioning from the north, off from your ag or off from your destination feed locations, and they're transitioning back south, and they get behind you, and you think that you're good to go. Well, if the does continue to transition past you to the south, and they continue on, and they don't stop, or there's nothing there that's going to hang them up, that's going to create, let's say there's not more oaks that they're going to stop and take a bite to eat, they'll continue on. But let's say a cruising buck situation. So there's two things. One, those does, just because their heads are faced the other way, does not mean that they're not going to wind you. And I get some static on that, and people like, well, they're heading in that other direction, there's no chance they're going to smell you. Well, them are the same folks that will agree with you that when a buck beds in his buck bedding area, that he, the majority of the time, I'm going to say it depends on where you're at in a contour, but a lot of the times a buck will bed with his back to the wind. So in other words, the wind is at the back of his head, correct? So he's using his eyes as another form of defense. Well, if that's the case, and that they do that when they bed, they have that same ability to wind you if they're walking away from you. It's still at the back of their head, whether they're bedded or they're walking, it's at the back of their head. Well, I like to do is take myself out of that equation, and that's where that T-shape stand placement comes in, is because if you're on the side and your wind is to the from the north, or it should be a north. If you're accessing from the east, it should be a northwest wind, a west, or a southwest wind. Then that wind is quartering away from them. You're on the downwind side of them. It's quartering to them at their nose because they are upwind of you. You're downwind of them, and they transition past you. And there's no possible way, unless you have a major wind change or something that you didn't study the forecast down the road further enough that that 3-4 hours beyond that time that you're hunting, it may change to the south, let's say, or toward the northeast or something easterly to cut that wind. That is when the power of that wind direction, these T-shaped stand placements, is so powerful this time of the year, because one, you don't stand that chance of that wind getting at the back of their heads, and they stop to get that one last bite of, on an acorn flat or something, and they just happen to turn their head just enough and they wind you. And like I said, that's something that folks just don't believe that happens. But I've seen it time and time and time again. I've watched videos. I've been in the stand when I was hired to go, not my clients myself, because I've always tried to talk everybody out of that. But as far as, when I was hired to be a cameraman and we'd go into those situations, and, it wasn't my job or I wasn't getting paid to tell them that, and it wasn't my place. I wasn't, not telling them because I wasn't getting paid, but it wasn't my place, to say that. And I'm sitting in the stand thinking this is not going to be good. And time and time and time again, I have hours of footage that I can show you of that happening. So I learned a long time ago to take yourself out of that equation. So on a T in review on a T stand placement, if you're accessing from the east, you should have if the deer are transitioning from the north, you should have a northeast or a northwest, west, or southwest wind to hunt that stand. And like I said, what makes that powerful is in a lot of cases when that deer transitions back from bedding back out to the ag, opposite of what you were hunting them in the morning, a lot of times you can hunt that same stand location, depending on where it's at through that that transition area. You can hunt that same stand again in the evening, even if the wind doesn't change completely around. In order to hunt those deer coming off from that, in this situation, in order to hunt those deer coming off the ag to the north and transitioning to the south, when you're when you're hanging inline stand sets, you have to hopefully wait to hunt that in the evening. You have to wait until the wind switches out of the south for an evening hunt. Well, this week is a perfect example. That's not going to happen for 5 to 6 days. So in a hurry, you take yourself out of that equation, and it could be a very powerful set or week of sets. So that's where the T-shaped stand placement comes in. That's the number one reason. The second thing is because we're, like we had said before, the cruising period now kicks in, and even though that you beat the nose of that buck going, if you are hanging inline sets, even if you do beat him going to the south, whether he's on a doe or by himself cruising, and you check the scrape, and like I said, it just didn't happen, or if it wasn't the buck that you wanted to shoot, and he gets past you. And this time of the year, what is scary about that is if he gets past you and is going to the south, and 20 minutes later he starts to cycle back over, or he wants to recheck them scrapes again, and now he's working his way back to the north, which happens a lot, especially on small parcels where he may be, let's say it's a 40 or an 80, and there's a doe that's getting close in that area, and he may not be the only buck that's checking those scrapes. So the higher your buck counts are, your buck numbers are, the more the mature buck numbers are, the more he's going to start checking those scrapes more relatively or more often. And what happens is he gets gone for about 20 minutes or a half hour, and next thing you know, here he comes back on that same line of travel on that same trail. Well, guess what? If you're hanging a stand and in line, you're going to get busted. Now the wind is in his favor, and that's when things get real crazy. Now, that's if, like I said, that's in a situation where you may have passed that deer in the morning and he's going through. Now, the best case scenario is you passed him in the morning, 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, he comes back in there, and it's not a deer that you want to shoot. Well, you're still going to get busted, which is never a good thing. And that's something too that I hear all the time. Well, I didn't want to shoot him anyway. And it's never a great idea to just say, if he wins me, he wins me. It wasn't when I wanted to shoot, or the notorious rifle mentality that I hear all the time, rifle hunting mentality that I hear all the time. Well, I'll shoot him before he wins me. Well, that's about the most horrible strategy that I've ever heard in my life, and every time I hear that, it makes me cringe. But so now we're looking at that deer transitioning back through there. Well, what if it's the buck that your hit lister that went that got around you 60 yards around you on that AM hunt 30 minutes ago, a half hour ago, 2 hours ago, and you had decided to hang in the stand, maybe a little bit longer than you usually do, trying to catch that 10 to 2 movement, and at noon Now you look to the south and you're in the same stand, and now you look to the south and here he comes with his nose in the wind. What do you think's going to happen? I can tell you what's going to happen. He is going to he's going to bust you, and it's going to be game over. And it may in a high now low pressure state, maybe you'll have another chance at him in the season. Where I'm from here, where I'm born and raised here and based out of in Michigan, and that may be the only time you ever have a chance at that buck. And especially if you're hunting, this situation happens on public ground, I can almost guarantee you that you won't have another a opportunity at him. So what's the way to cure that? And the way to cure that, guys, is to make sure you're hanging T stand placements, T style stand placements. And I hope that makes sense, guys. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks.